On February 24th, 1978, five friends drove to a basketball game in Chico, California. They stopped at a convenience store afterward, where they bought snacks. That stop is among the last documented sightings of them alive. 4 days later, their car was found, roughly 70 miles from Yuba City, abandoned on a remote mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. It was in working condition. It wasn't damaged. Investigators couldn't explain why it had been abandoned. The men were gone. Months later, investigators would find some of them, not all. And more than 4 decades later, nobody has ever explained why five friends ended up on that mountain in the first place. This is Noxtara, and this is the story of the Yuba County Five. As always, everything here is separated into what's confirmed, what's reported but unverified, and what remains theory. This case in particular has attracted a lot of speculation over the decades. We're going to stay close to what the evidence actually shows.
Who they were: Ted Wire, Gary Mathias, Jack Madruga, Jack Hewitt, Bill Sterling. Five friends from Yuba City, California, in their 20s and 30s. Their families called them the Boys. 4 of the men had intellectual or developmental disabilities. Gary Mathias had a history of schizophrenia, managed with medication. All 5 were independent enough to hold routines, take short trips, and play organized sports together, including on a local basketball team, the Gateway Gators. They were scheduled to play the following day in a Special Olympics tournament, with a trip to Los Angeles as the prize. On the night of the 24th, the 5 of them piled into Jack Madruga's Mercury Montego and drove about 50 miles to Chico State to watch a college basketball game. Nothing about the night suggested anything was wrong. After the game, they stopped at a convenience store where they bought snacks and drinks. They never made it home. The next morning, families reported them missing. Search efforts began, but for days, there was nothing.
The abandoned car. Then, on February 28th, deputies found Madruga's car on the Oroville-Quincy Highway in Butte County, roughly 70 miles from Yuba City, abandoned on a remote mountain road in the Plumas National Forest. The snacks were eaten, the doors were unlocked, one window was down. There was still a quarter tank of gas. Empty wrappers, a basketball game program, and a neatly folded roadmap were left inside. The men and the keys were gone. Investigators examined the car. It was in working condition. It wasn't damaged. They couldn't explain why it had been abandoned. Winter conditions made the mountain search extremely difficult. Then, in June, the snow melted. On June 4th, motorcyclists riding off-road near a U.S. Forest Service campground, about 20 miles from where the car had been found, discovered a trailer. Inside, they found Ted Wire, dead on a bed. The night he disappeared, Ted had been clean-shaven. When he was found, he had a full beard, and he had lost close to 100 pounds. Based on the beard growth and weight loss, the coroner estimated Ted had survived somewhere between 8 and 13 weeks inside that trailer.
Investigators later reconstructed some of what may have happened inside. They believed the men had entered the trailer through a broken window. In a shed outside, roughly 3 dozen military-style ration cans had been opened and eaten. But that same shed held something else, a separate locker containing dehydrated food and fruit, reportedly enough to feed all 5 men for about a year. That locker was never opened. Matches, firewood, and a propane tank connected to the trailer's heating system sat nearby, unused. Ted ultimately died from a combination of starvation and hypothermia, according to the autopsy, despite the food and heating materials nearby. His feet were severely frostbitten. His own leather shoes were missing entirely, and his body was found wrapped tightly in 8 bedsheets. The evidence doesn't tell us who wrapped him or when. There was one more detail inside that trailer: a pair of sneakers, Gary Mathias's. Wire's own larger shoes were missing. Investigators later considered the possibility that Mathias had been inside the trailer too.
One idea is that Matthias took Weyer's shoes because his own feet had swollen from the cold, but that remains an inference. We don't know whether Matthias actually left the trailer afterward, or what happened to him next. He was never seen again.
The other 3 plus theories. The following day, searchers found the remains of Jack Madruga and Bill Sterling, about 11 miles from the abandoned car. Jack Hewitt was found separately, about 2 miles northeast of the trailer. Months of exposure to wildlife had left little behind. Autopsies attributed their deaths to hypothermia. Investigators found no confirmed weapon and no clear physical evidence establishing a homicide. Gary Matthias was never found. Not that day, not since. The simplest explanation: the group got lost, took a wrong turn in the dark, and became stranded in conditions none of them were prepared for. It's consistent with the absence of any confirmed weapon or clear evidence of violence, and with a car left on a road that made no sense for their route home. But it struggles to explain some of the specifics. Why abandon a car that was still in working condition? Why leave the vehicle and travel so far through deep snow? And why would a starving man with a large supply of food nearby never open that locker? Some investigators who've spent years on this case believe something more than bad luck was involved. But there's a significant counterweight. Investigators have never confirmed a weapon and have never established clear evidence of a homicide. Foul play remains a theory some find persuasive. It isn't proven. Reporting what we don't know. Some later reporting has suggested that Forest Service employees may have told local sheriff's officials about a heated trailer in the area months before Ted was found. That detail comes from later investigative reporting, not the confirmed case file. What is well documented is that the investigation involved multiple jurisdictions, with different agencies handling different parts of the search. A fourth, more speculative idea proposes that confusion, panic, or a breakdown in group decision-making led the men to make a series of choices that, individually, might have seemed to make sense at the time. Unlike the car, the trailer, or the physical remains, this idea isn't grounded in direct evidence. It's an attempt to explain a pattern of decisions, not a documented finding. Here's what we know. 5 friends left a basketball game together on February 24, 1978. Their car was later found undamaged, roughly 70 miles from home, on a remote mountain road. Ted Weyer's body was found in a nearby trailer months later, in a condition suggesting he survived for weeks, despite a locker of food sitting unopened nearby. 3 other men were found dead in the surrounding forest. Gary Matthias was never found. Here's what we don't know. Why the car ended up where it did. Why that food locker was never opened. Who wrapped Ted in those sheets. And what ultimately happened to Gary Matthias.
We know how this ends for 4 of them. We don't know how it started. Somewhere between a basketball game and a mountain road, 5 friends made a series of decisions nobody has ever been able to explain. And somewhere in that same forest, one of them may have walked on alone. More than 4 decades later, Gary Matthias has never been found. 5 friends vanished in the mountains. 4 were found dead. The 5th was never found. Our next case leaves a different kind of question behind. Not where someone went, but who they really were before they got there.